Hi, welcome to the Colloquium, the April lecture. And my name is Linda Vita. I'm the director of the Water Resources Center Archives, and we host this series. And I just wanted to make a brief announcement before we get to the speaker, which is that we have some brochures and postcards in the back of the room, and there's also a sign-up sheet. So if you would like to be on our email list to get reminders about what lectures are coming up, you can please sign up on the sign-up sheet. And with that, I'd like to introduce David Sedlak, who is a professor of engineering here at Cal.
Thanks. I guess I'm filling in for Nary, and I probably can't do justice and do a good Nary introduction, so I'll just keep it brief. I guess Tom Birmingham was the person listed on the seminar for the speaker, and actually we're quite lucky that because Tom wasn't able to make it, and the person who actually wrote the talk and did all the work here is able to give us a talk. So Tad Bettner is the Deputy General Manager at Westlands Water District, and he'll be giving us our talk tonight. He's been at Westlands Water District for 6 years, and his original training is actually as an engineer. So he has about 10 years experience at Fresno, before that thinking about water issues, and before that a bachelor's degree from Cal State San Luis Obispo. So it's a pleasure also to have an engineer talking to us about water. But I'm pretty sure tonight we're not going to hear about engineering. We're going to hear about water and politics of water in California. And so those of you who are not familiar with Westlands Water District, haven't thought about this, the water controversy from the side of the agricultural water users, I think it's a time to readjust your thinking and to see it from their perspective, because there's a very large agricultural industry that depends upon the Central Valley Project for water and water supply, and they're stuck in the same sorts of negotiation as the environmentalists and the cities with respect to water rights and water use. And I think it's fascinating to see it and to see how water conservation and all of the water wars affect their day-to-day living. And I think Tad is going to give us that kind of perspective on the politics, the policy, and the engineering of water in the Central Valley. So with that, I'd like to invite Tad.
Is this on? All right, well, I do thank you for the invitation. I do apologize for Tom not being able to show up. There were some things that happened last week that he got called away on, so he was not available today. But as usual, the relationship with Tom and I, usually I do a lot of the work and then he just presents it. So I'm going to try and actually present some of the information that I prepared for this evening. I'd like to keep things pretty casual, so if you have questions as I kind of go through things, as long as they're not too in-depth, I'd be happy to address those. If you start to get too in-depth, I'm just going to cut you off and save it for later. But one of the things I want to do is just try and get a little bit of feedback before I get started to get an idea of what things to spend time on maybe what things just to kind of flip through. But how many people are familiar with our district, with Westlands? Heard the name before? How about a little familiar? Okay, so just how about California water, good understanding how water moves in the state? All right, let's see, what else? I guess that's probably enough questions for now. And I'll answer questions just to make sure awake as I go through this, so I know that everybody's keeping track of what's up. But let's see here. Let's first start off with just kind of the lay of land in California, and just give you a quick, Geography 101, Water 101 about how water moves in the state, because that'll kind of help you to better understand some of the issues that we're facing and how we're addressing those. And I'll just start from Northern California down to the south where we are here. In Northern California, obviously you've heard the fact that 2/3 of the water falls in the northern part of the state, and that is a fact. Most of the water that we get as Central Valley Project users comes from 2 reservoirs in the north, that being Trinity and Shasta. That water flows down the Sacramento River. Another reservoir is Folsom Reservoir, which is just east of Sacramento. Water comes down the American River, it blends here, and then ultimately hits the Delta, where there's 2, well, at least for the Central Valley Project, there's 1 pumping plant called Tracy Pumping Plant. Water is lifted about 300 feet out of the Delta, is put into the Delta Mendota Canal, and then makes its way down to ultimately the south of Delta agricultural users, which are these water users that comprise roughly about 750,000 acres on the west side of the San Joaquin Valley from Tracy down to Kettleman City. The other area in blue here is unfortunate, but we did this in GIS, but it actually matched the ocean here. But this is Santa Clara Valley Water District and Pajaro Valley Water Management Agency, which are on the other side of the coastal range. In a simpler deal to look at again, just kind of gives you more defined areas of the rivers here in the north. Again, the focal point being the delta, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. Another benefit we have is the San Luis Reservoir, which is about a million acre feet reservoir for the Central Valley Project, which ultimately moves water down into Westlands. And also, I did distribute a handout so you can hopefully follow me on that. And if you have any questions or notes you want to jot down, we can discuss. We can take those as well. One of these things is often get missed. We come and talk to people as well. Who really is Westlands? How is it an entity? Is it part of the state? Is it private? What is it? And so I just want to walk through a little bit about just kind of describing what a water district is, how it's set up, and then get into how we engage folks outside of the district. We're a water district. We're actually the largest water district in the United States. In terms of land area, we're just behind Imperial Irrigation District is the largest district in the United States. We have lands, all our lands are on the west side. So if you drive from Highway 5 and if you're in Los Banos and you kind of wake up and you're in Kettleman City, you've kind of driven through our district. So it's that long stretch of I-5. It's about 80 miles long and it's about 16 miles wide. We service predominantly agricultural operations with irrigation water that's from the project. We have about 6,000 acre feet of M&I users that we also deliver water to. Our entire system is pipelined, and so when you're driving out there, you're not going to see any open ditches. It was decided when the district was formed back in when the project was constructed in the early 60s and ultimately completed in the late 60s, that having open ditches with percolation in the groundwater didn't make sense. Some of the groundwater had perched saline water to it, and so piping the system essentially eliminates any loss. And so when the directors at that time and the leaders of the district decided to spend, at that time it was about $280 million to essentially pipeline every open ditch and also provide for new deliveries to new lands coming under service. We have about 1,000 miles of that underground pipe. Some of our largest pipe is about 84 inches in diameter, so about 7 feet in diameter, and it necks all the way down to about 18 inches. Every meter in our district is metered. Every delivery, every farmer turnout has a flow meter on it. And so what we do is we keep track of how much water users use. They have an allocation that's available to them on an annual basis. And then what we do is we charge them for the water that's delivered. So every year we go through a budgeting process. We determine what our costs of operations are going to be, what the water costs are, and then from there, that dictates how much we charge our water users. And we are self-contained. We are a public agency from the standpoint that we are audited annually by the state of California, but in terms of revenue, grants, loans, anything else that we take out is solely paid for by the landowners and water users within our district. Quick history of Westlands. I think a lot of people just think Westlands came on the map in the recent, but actually a lot of the land in Westlands has been farmed for a long period of time. We have records going back to indicate that some of this land was dryland farmed in the early or late 1800s, early 1900s. Records of water or lands being first irrigated in 1915. Here's a delivery of a well. This is an olive grove at the time in the southern end of the district. So we have well water that was being developed at that time. We also had 3 or 4 creeks that flew off the coastal range into the district, and that water was also used beneficially for crop irrigation. We organized the first water system with landowners district in about 1942. Then the district was formed in 1952. And then I said earlier that the project that being the California Aqueduct, San Luis Canal, as well as the district's internal distribution system, was completed in about 1968. And here's some old photos that we have in the office. These guys are old well drillers, and this is about 1930 or so. It's a cotton field about the same time. In terms of starting getting into the meat of kind of where we're at, obviously want to focus this evening about water supply and what we're doing to essentially maintain our current water supply as well as manage that supply efficiently. And first of all, just start out and talk a little bit about our current water supply. We have a current water service contract with the United States, and that provides for delivery of a 1.15 million acre feet per year. And we're actually in the process of renewing that contract. When the Central Valley Improvement Act was signed in 1992 by President Bush at that time, first Bush, it provided for renewal of all our CVP contracts. And actually, it was mandatory that those contracts be renewed. And there's always been discussion of, well, how long you renew it for, what period of time. But we know right now that we have a period of one 25-year contract and then potentially a second 25-year contract. So since about 1993, 1994, Bureau of Reclamation started the process of going through this contract renewal, developing the contract, the terms of the contract, how much water would go to each contractor, proving that all the water under the contracts was being beneficially used. Pretty lengthy process, and I'm happy to tell you here in 2006 that process is still going. We actually expect or hoping that we'll sign a contract this year that would become effective March 1 of 2007. There are a few wrinkles in that contract process that we're currently working on, but we expect to get those issues resolved here shortly. And then talking a little bit about our water supply, since about 1991 and 1992 as a result of CVPIA, we've had our water supply reduced because of new regulations. And those have been imposed by Reclamation as a result of CVPI, the State Water Resources Control Board, Endangered Species Act, and I could kind of keep going, but those are primarily the big three that have resulted in water supply being diverted away from us to other uses. And then that the only years that we were able to receive a full allocation were in 1989, 95, and 98, all of which were extremely wet years. And then today, the reality that we have is that basically in a normal year, and obviously this year and last year aren't normal, but in a normal year, in terms of precipitation, river runoff, et cetera, we can expect only to receive about 50 to 70% of our contracted supplies. And this is a chart. If you look at it, this is a period from 1969 to 2001. And what we did is we looked at, if you took all those regulations now, or that are in effect, and essentially graphed them under a normal year condition, normal hydrology, and wet years even, this is what would happen to our water supply. And so all these years previously, except for the drought of 77, we would have got 100% of our contract supply. And then about every year to every other year, as new rules were imposed by the CVPIA, State Water Resources Control Board, ESA, Delta Smelt, CalFed Rod, Bay Delta Accord, et cetera, our supply is continually dwindled down to where, like I said, we're probably in the 50 to 70% range.
What's it been the last 3 or 4 years for these record Delta exports?
The last 3 or 4 years, primarily, we've seen, well, that there was we had to renegotiate the Trinity. So under the Trinity rod, there was more water that was dedicated or left in the river. And so that was another one that reduced exports approximately 5 to 7%. And then the other one that we continually not battle on, but it's questionable every year, is Delta Smelt under ESA. Every year, this time of year, the Bureau, in partnership with the sister agencies, Fish and Wildlife Service, tends to hold back water, not make it available because they're not sure whether there's going to be any Delta Smelt actions in the Delta or not. And so today, we're sitting with, we could probably be at a 95% allocation given how wet conditions are. chances are we may only be at 80 because they're reserving 15% in case there are future delta smelt actions for this year.
So what's happened what percentage have you gotten the last 3 or 4 years?
The last, well, let's see, we had 2001 was 49%. I think 2002 was 65, then we went to 70, 75. Last year we're 85. This year is potentially we'll end up at 85 maybe in July or August as they continue to increase allocations, as they see water may or may not be necessary. The problem with that is a lot of times, grower demands or grower decisions have already been made by a date, so sometimes that water can't be beneficially used because it's made available too late.
Yeah, I was just wondering that this is federal water, but doesn't federal water have to comply with state water law?
It does, correct, yeah, and that's why, some of the issues that have come up has been from the State Water Resources Control Board and D1641 and some of the Delta standards that were set up through that process. In the back.
Your turnouts, are they south of San Luis, north of San Luis?
San Luis, in terms of, what do you mean?
Where do you take deliveries?
We take deliveries off the San Luis Canal, California Aqueduct, which would be south of San Luis Reservoir. Yeah, South San Luis Reservoir.
South to Panama City?
Yeah, it'd probably be, I don't know, trying to think what the best, it'd probably be about, I can't even give you a good place to look on, say, Highway 5 to know where our district starts. There's a Dos Amigos pumping plant on the California, we start probably 3 or 4 miles south of there. I think one of the other wake-up calls that our district got as we looked through these new standards and looked at what would happen in our water supply, particularly in a dry year, was what are decisions that the district needs to start making now, and they're pretty significant, which I'm going to talk in a little bit. But first, just kind of revisiting what would happen in the next drought that we have. And as a matter of fact, if you would have asked me in November of this year, or last year, November 2005, I thought we were heading probably into a dry year. And honestly, I'm kind of shocked where things are end up to have really the last 4 or 5 years being normal to wet, last year being really wet, and this year being even worse on top of that in terms of floods, et cetera. It's kind of a surprise if you look at the hydrology. But eventually, I think everybody needs to acknowledge that we're going to hit a drought, and what are we going to do? And within Westlands, we've come to the point now that we're not looking for other people to solve our problems. I think we realize that when there's a drought, we're going to have to deal with that internally. And what this chart shows is, looks at what happened essentially if you would have said we had no regulatory environment that were posed after 1990. So the blue bars look at, well, what would happen in the last drought? Just saying if we would operate the system the way it was historically operated or the way the system was originally designed to operate when it was constructed. And those would be the percentage allocations in the blue bars. The yellow, well, I don't know, the cream bars, I guess, was what our allocations were relatively what they actually ended up being in those years. So essentially it looks at near-term conditions, imposes what happened then, and what would likely happen or would have happened should a drought hit in, say, 1999 or 2000, 2001. And 2001 being a dry year when we received 49%. But the big hit is going to be now taking all these new impositions on the project, regulatory environment, how water is delivered, et cetera, and say what would conditions be under 2020, and that also emulates what our new contract terms are as well. And you can see in these bars, there's years that were in about 33%, 11%, 43%. There's actually allocations where we get no water in the 1990 year, 13 and 22. And so basically we had to come to the point, well, how do we deal with that? Obviously we have other supplies within the district. There's groundwater that we can rely on, that we can move around. But essentially we need to deal with this problem internally. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're currently addressing those issues.
Question?
Sure.
Do you look at global warming scenarios at all?
The 2020 conditions, what we did is we used calcium 2 modeling, which has been developed by DWR and the Bureau of Reclamation, And my understanding is that global warming has been incorporated into that modeling to a certain extent, but again, I don't think they know the full, they don't have a full understanding of it. So I would say that maybe 25% is represented in that model currently. I'm not sure what DWR is doing to incorporate more information into that model.
Could you go back to the previous slide? So what would a graph of some kind of meaningful agricultural output index look like, superimposed upon this percentage of water received? What I'm asking is, have you gotten any better at using it?
Oh yeah, and I'm gonna get into that a little bit. Certainly, I mean, I'm still kind of looking global. You know, I'm looking at big picture, statewide, district. You know, how water comes to the district. And then I'm gonna talk a little bit later about, you know, now once water gets into the district, what are we doing with it, and you know, or how are we being better stewards of the resource? No, that's a good question. And then just to maybe make things a little bit more confusing for you, the colors didn't come out at all in this. This is now the other slides looked at, well, what happens in a normal year? And obviously you don't have a normal year in and year out. It's just more or less, that's kind of a modeling, look at modeling overall. Then we looked at a drought, what happens in a drought. Obviously you don't have a drought every year, but we live through drought periods. Now this gets to, you know, what happens really with our supply, how do we use it, what are some of the actions that we're taking to deal with that supply. And I just want to walk through this graph briefly, and then I'm going to come back to it at the very end. But this top bar represents if we were to essentially crop every acre in the district. We have about 600,000 acres, about 570,000 acres can be irrigated. If you were to plant every acre in the district, the demand for water would be about 1.45 million acre feet. So that's how much we would need essentially to maintain all the lands within the district being irrigated. This line across here represents our contract amount, the 1.15. So you can see that there's about 350,000 acre feet that if we were short, or 350,000 acre feet, that even if we did receive a full contract, we'd still be short by that amount of water that we'd have to either go out and buy from other water districts, other landowners, or pump groundwater to make up the difference. And then what you have here, the balance of these bars represent what our supply was. And they're a mixture of contract supply, which is, I guess shows up clear on here. Water user acquired, our water users go out and buy water on an annual basis. You have groundwater that show up as the same color, great. And then we have other supplies that we bring in. And then this blue line represents how many acres are fallowed on an annual basis or not put into production. So going across here, you can see going from about 1988, 89, we've had this fluctuation in supply. We went through a drought, got wet, it goes back up. And then what we've seen in the last 3 or 4 years is we see this line start to flatten out. And really what our goal is to flatten that line out. We want year in, year out this water supply to be constant. Now it's not going to be constant from a contract supply standpoint. It's not going to be constant from a groundwater supply or a transfer standpoint. But if you blend all those supplies together, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get to a point where we're going to come up with supply year in and year out that we can tell our water users is available for their use. Now, the decision that they have to make is based on that supply, what decisions do they make based on their own operation? And one of the things that's happened is, and this is, if you read off this blue line off the right side of the chart here, is that every year land is going to be taken out of production or it's going to be fallowed. So the blue line represents how many acres on an annual basis is taken out of production. So when we had the drought in the late 80s, early 90s, you can see that we had, where we peaked out of about 125,000 acres fallowed in the district. So about 25% of the district was just dirt. I mean, that's all it looked like when you went out there. And then we got into a wetter period. We hit this drier period. Again, we peaked about 100,000. I think it was 97,000 acres is what was fallowed in 2002, 2003. And then now we're kind of coming back and flattening out to where probably on a regular basis we're going to fallow about 70,000 acres. Now, looking at that, knowing kind of, well, this is what our water supply is, how are we going to manage that? What are we going to do to, one, hopefully maintain what we already have because we're already water short. So one of the goals needs to be is to maintain the status quo, if you will, in terms of trying to keep that same supply coming into the district every year. And then how do we improve it more efficiently? Another thing I want to talk about is how do we manage the demand? Because you're going to have a supply of what you're bringing in, but you need to match that to what your demand is within the district. And so I'm going to talk about what the district has done to essentially operate under a demand management scheme. And then there is a little bit of supply enhancement that we can do. We can potentially go out and buy more permanent supplies, bringing them in. It's a pretty small amount, but I'll talk about that as well. So it kind of works. I found this chart. It should have been more like a shotgun thing because you're kind of always got one target, you're shooting at it, and it doesn't work in this nice, neat, orderly fashion. Everything is always sort of happening at the same time, and so it's kind of hard to put that into a graphical format, but came up with this. But I'm just going to kind of work around this wheel and talk about each one of these aspects of water supply programs that we're doing. And again, if this is where you have questions, it's probably more of the meat of what we're doing internally. So if you have questions, by all means, please ask them. I just want to talk a little bit about cow-fed. There's a lot of talk about cow-fed and the cow-fed rod, and there's some things that I use the word promise, a term pretty loosely, but there was some goals that were identified in cow-fed, and I think everybody from the water user side had expectations of cow-fed. I think the environmental community had expectations of cow-fed. M&I users had expectation of cow-fed, and I think if you were to have everybody come in, probably each one of those groups, they'd probably all say to a certain extent they've all been disappointed. But I think cow-fed, to the best ability it could, tried to bring all these goals together and say, well, how do we make them match up the best that we can? We as an ag water district, particularly south of Delta, we have our things within cow-fed that we like. And so what I try to do is extract those things, and I want to spend a few minutes focusing on those about what our priorities are and what we're doing to try and get those things within cow-fed continue to move forward. And the first thing that we think in cow-fed, which was identified in the ROD that we continually try to impose and what we want to incorporate every year is the joint point of diversion. And what this is it allows for the two projects. There's a state water project and the Central Valley project. Each one of those has a pumping facility at the Delta. And there are times when one project may have capacity, the other one doesn't. One project may have fish at the facilities, the other one doesn't. One project has storage, the other one doesn't. And so the ability for those two projects essentially to overlap or to share capacity or exchange capacity is extremely important. So instead of having two projects operating completely separately, you essentially incorporate those two projects, use them as one resource for the best possible use, or now it becomes a joint point of diversion. So when you hear people refer to joint point of diversion, that's what we're talking about. So utilization of those two projects together to maximum extent to, one, be able to export water when conditions provide for that, to minimize impacts on fish, et cetera. If we can utilize that, that's important. So we've tried to work with the State Water Resources Control Board to get that approved on an annual basis. And sometimes it works and sometimes it's very difficult. The other one that I'll talk a little bit, and I have a few more slides on, is increasing the state water project pumping to 8,500 CFS. Currently, they're limited in the summer to pumping about 6,600 CFS. And so this would provide additional flexibility to the system. And one of the things that just a little footnote on this is there's been some talk about it. It's come out as an environmental document. DWR has been doing some planning and scoping meetings, and one of the big things that is discussed is, well, it's going to export more water. And really, what this does is it adds flexibility. It allows the pumping facility to pump more, but at times when there may not be any impacts to delta water quality or to the fisheries. And so improving that facility and the flexibility is an extreme benefit. Another one is an intertie between two canal facilities. Again, I'll cover that in a few minutes. One of the other ones that was an expectation that we received was that south of Delta ag water users would see an increase of about 15%. And that essentially, when we signed the ROD, essentially we were supposed to get about 70% allocation or better on an average or a normal year. And there's been a couple years, when I referenced earlier, where there was a normal year and we really had to battle to get to 70%. It involved, getting some of our Congress folks and senators involved in the process to say that, well, this is what was promised to us when we signed the ROD, and this is what we expect. And so that was one of the things that we've had to continually push for. Another one is the establishment of an environmental water account, which is one of the things that we did support all along. We continue to support, and that essentially is an account set up for the fisheries to allow for water to be acquired from willing sellers. That's put into a pool on an annual basis, and then that water can be used by those project managers the best way they see fit in order to provide a benefit to the fisheries.
Does Westlands make a lot of money off that?
We don't sell any water to the EWA. No, and one of the things that, just touch briefly on that, is that when the Central Valley Project Improvement Act was signed, there was a provision in there called 3406B2, which is within CVPIA, and that called for 800,000 acre feet to be essentially taken from the CVP and used for fisheries, export cuts, making upstream water available, releases out of reservoirs, et cetera. And so when we look at the system and you look at how much water is needed to provide for fishery enhancement, from the CVP side, that 800,000 acre feet is typically enough water. And so there's no need for them to go buy any more water to essentially cover the CVP. What they do go out and buy is water for the State Water Project, which has no provision like CVPIA. So essentially, if the fishery agencies see that the State Water Project is affecting the delta anyway, the EWA needs to cover all those costs. And to make matters just a little bit more complicated is that with the State Water Resources Control Board, they track molecules of water. And so if you're going to use water to benefit the State Water Project, you need to use State Water Project water, or you need to buy State Water Project water. So typically, the environmental water account is out buying State Water Project water. And if folks are making money or anything, it's primarily be the entities within the State Water Project. Yes?
All right, when you're done with the slide, I just want to ask you.
Okay. And then the last thing that we tried to focus on is, like I said, we're trying to protect what we have. And so we see that there's been a baseline established. And the thing that we try and do is, this is where things get political with the local, state, and federal levels, making sure that new standards are imposed that continue to erode what our supply is or end up in water within the project or yield within the project being dedicated to other uses besides contractors.
So question, you frame this as support for CalFed.
Yeah.
And what are the points in here where if they go away, funding for EWA, it's got half last year. What if funding for EWA goes away? I mean, the world has changed, Delta ecosystem's dying. Right. So at what point do you say you no longer support CalFed? What are the things on this list?
Well, that's I will be honest. I mean, there is even recently there's been a huge effort to bring kind of put CalFed back up on its feet, and it's taken South Delta ag contractors a lot of consternation of whether to even get back in it, because realistically we're going to continue to give up water to the environment. The 800,000 acre feet that's outside of CalFed. And so there's really nothing that's going to help us there. In terms of seeing our allocation increase by 15%, that's an annual fight. I mean, we're always fighting about our allocation. The intertie, we just got sued over that. We tried to get that built, and then we had an environmental just come in and sue over that. So that's at a dead stop, even though That process occurred outside CalFed. We've supported the State Water Project, but they're kind of up against their own challenge. Joint point aversion is a battle. So I guess the way we see is, well, we still think CalFed has merit. Now, does it provide real benefits to us on an annual basis? Probably not. But I was talking to a few folks earlier that when you get into this industry, the water industry, it's about, it takes relationships, things take time, and a lot of time, and it also takes money. And so this year we're going into CalFed. We're going to provide probably about $2 million into CalFed. Are we going to see any appreciable benefit? Probably not this year, but hopefully as the process kind of gets restored, they get some people back on staff, they start to, I would say, improve their reputation, then hopefully things start moving. But it is tough. It's tough to evaluate if there's no real benefits, why are we in it? But I think, again, it's at this point we're trying to build relationships. I'm going to, just for the sake of time, maybe skip through some of these slides. It kind of talks about different aspects of CalFed which we support. If you have questions about these, I'd be happy to answer them after our time here. And this is just a map, talk about a few of those facilities. Here are the two pumping plants up here on the south end of the delta. The intertie I mentioned was between two canal facilities here, which I mentioned earlier. So, just kind of skip these for the sake of time. Talked about building relationships, and I think besides just CalFed, one of the things that is becoming increasingly important is that there's probably a crisis coming in the water world. I think, as mentioned earlier, we're seeing problems in the delta, and people are trying to scratch their head as to, well, is it a problem because of diversions? Do we have invasive species? Do you have a fishery that just maybe it was introduced that was never supposed to exist here in the first place? So there's a lot of questions being asked. And the question is, well, outside of those questions, what can we do to be sticking together to make sure, if and when that crisis comes, that we've kind of got our act together, that all of us are on the same page. And so what we've tried to do is essentially continue to foster relationships, build relationships in our own community, within the Central Valley Project, within other service area, with other contractors, to make sure that we're all saying the same thing, we're all speaking the same language. And this is just a brief list of some of the things that we've been doing here of late. We had a big memorandum of understanding that we signed between the Fresno Water Users Authority and our district. We're also continuing to work with them with restoration of the San Joaquin River and how that can be done to benefit the fisheries and surrounding agencies. And so we partner with them in those things. We also have other Delta contractors north of the Delta, so up in the upper Sac Valley. We've participated in water transfers and agreements with them as well. Exchange contractors, which is an entity that neighbors us. We've been working with them on MOUs, water transfers, and drainage. And then also coordination with the Bureau on contract renewal, which I mentioned earlier, allocation and operations. In terms of now maybe getting into the district, and maybe this is what you came to hear, and I apologize for getting to it this late, but I just want to talk for a while about water use efficiency, what we're doing to use the water in the best way we can. And a lot of these things you're going to see are essentially cutting edge. They're things that no other district is doing, no entity in the state. And so we kind of take some pride in some of these things. First of all, I'd like to just talk about irrigation systems. And irrigation systems in our district are becoming more and more important because our crops are becoming more and more diversified. This picture of lettuce in the district, which we have as the Salinas Valley has problems with saltwater intrusion, being able to grow less and less. We're starting to see more water users coming into Westlands to grow crops. Same thing down in Imperial. We have a lot of growers that are Imperial that are starting to move up into Westlands. We also are having issues with more permanent crops. So as row crops become less and less popular, as they become tougher and tougher to farm economically, permanent crops are becoming the solution. So we have almonds, pistachios. These are wine grapes. And then here, just the idea of just sprinklers in the district. And one of the things that we're having to do as we look at water use efficiency, how we use more water wisely, is try and look at, well, what's happening to our crop mix? Because obviously the crops you plant, crops that our growers plant, will be based on what type of systems that they're going to use. And this just takes a quick look. We have about 60 different crops in the district that are grown. And I just pulled out a few quick ones to look at just to give you an idea of what are some of the changes that we're seeing in the district. Almonds, you can see here that we've seen our acreage increase by over 36,000 acres. That's a 300% increase in almonds. Cotton, which used to be sort of the backbone of what the district did. At one point, probably 40% of the district was farmed cotton, has decreased by over 100,000 acres. And this is, 93 to 2005. So you can see we've seen a 41% reduction in cotton. Garlic, we had a lot of garlic in the district. It's slowly, as China becomes more and more of a world marketeer of garlic, we've seen garlic reduced. Grapes and wine grapes have increased. Lettuce has increased. Pistachios have increased. And one of the interesting things is wheat, is that we have more problems with our water, not knowing what our allocations are going to be. Wheat seems to be a fairly safe crop, so we've seen a lot of growers start to plant wheat within the district. In terms of irrigation practices, one of the things that, because we get less and less water, obviously using the water more and more efficiently becomes more and more important. And so maybe two things I want to focus on this chart is just from the 1985 to 2005, looking at how different types of ground or how ground was irrigated within the district. And so you can see back in 1985, we used a lot of furrow irrigation. There was some sprinkler, and then we had a mix of sprinkler furrow. And then over time, as water has become less and less and more expensive, we've seen these numbers decrease. And so in terms of percent of the district, we've seen more or less furrow being irrigated, which sometimes has the view of being less efficient, to seeing drip irrigation, microspray significantly increase. So in about 1985, we're about 3 or 4% microspray to where now we've increased to nearly 30%. And in terms of water use efficiency, and just water use efficiency is essentially when you apply water, how much of that water applied does the crop beneficially use? And so that's what we talk about when we're looking at water use efficiency. So within Westlands, we essentially, for the last 25 years, have gotten our efficiency up to about 84%. CalFed goal and the Bureau of Reclamation's goal under their water conservation plans is 85%. So when we look at our district, we kind of see that we've met that target. We still think there's obviously ways to improve and get a little bit greater than that point, but right now we're pretty much where the targeted goal is under those two different programs. And right now we're looking at, as growers come to the district to want to improve, put in more water efficient systems, what's driving those decisions? And obviously the cost of water and availability is going to be the big driver. And right now, this last year, we actually leased out about $2.5 million to water users for them to come in. They get a low interest loan, and then they're able to use that money to put in low or more cost efficient systems. So then the question is, well, based on the crop mix, how we see things going in terms of permanent crops, more vegetables come in the district, which right now are using both above ground and buried drip irrigation. What are they going to do to essentially utilize more efficient systems? And so this looks again at this same graph that I showed you earlier, but extends it out to 2025, which would be about the life of our contract. And you can see, based on what we've seen, we're going to see projections that in terms of drip and micro spray irrigation, that we think that about half of our district is going to have some sort of high efficient, and drip is probably in the 88% efficiency range, systems going in. These systems probably on average are costing in the neighborhood of about $800 to $900 per acre. So it's a significant investment for growers to put those sorts of systems in. As I just mentioned, we do have a loan program that we offer to our water users. We have about $10.2 million we've put into a revolving fund. So water users are able to come in to the district, apply for those funds, and put on-farm systems on. We have about $2.5 million available each year. It's available to all our users and landowners within the district. And we provide a loan of $130,000 per 160 acres, and then they're required to pay that back in 4 years. And the numbers that we've seen, we've had this program going for about 10 years, and we've seen that it's benefited about 55,000 acres, and about 26,000 acre-feet has been conserved through that process. The newest technology that we're using is called CBAL, or it's satellite imagery. It's surface energy balance algorithms, and this is a process that we use that was put up by NASA originally. And it was developed and implemented in 2004, and it was started, or sort of branched off some work that was done in 2002 up in the Idaho Valley. And what it does is it calculates what crop ET, or crop evapotranspiration, to figure out how much water is used on an annual basis. And then breaks that down, and then once we have that, we can provide that information to our water users using the internet, using GIS, to where they can essentially get on there, they click on their account, and up comes a map of that land within the account, and they can figure out what their water use and water need is. And I'm just going to do a couple pictures of what it shows you. This is a map of the district, and it'll show you essentially, you can go in here and select this piece of property. So this grower would get on the internet, this map would come up, he would input what his property is, and then up comes an aerial view of his property. And then what they're able to do is essentially go in, and you can see what the ET, or what the water use is within this piece of property. The other thing it can do is it can tell you where water is not being applied evenly. It also gives you some abilities to figure out what's going on with your soil, if your soil is not uniform. And so, again, just another tool that we've put together for our water users that they can get on real-time, access this off the internet, and then know what decisions they need to be using in terms of water application. This showed up pretty well. In terms of kind of the next item talking about would be demand management. And I think, we've talked about some of maybe the expectations that we've gotten out of CalFed. We've talked about ways that we can conserve water, use it more efficiently. But there still comes to the point where there's just still not enough water to go around in the district. We just can't meet all the demands that there are in the district. And so in 2002, the district went through a program where it looked at, well, we need to balance the supply and the demand within the district. And the only way we really can do that is that we need to essentially limit our demand. And so the district at that time undertook the goal of acquiring about 100,000 acres within the district. And what we did is we have some areas that have shallow groundwater where the soil is not quite as productive it is in other parts of the district. And we targeted these areas to go in and buy land from willing sellers and willing buyers. And so the area here that actually has a shade on it shows you what lands the district has acquired to date. And here's a table that kind of shows you what we've done. We had a program in '99 where initially we did a trial project where we bought a little bit over 15,000 acres just to see environmental process-wise, land management-wise, is this process feasible? When it was deemed feasible, the district continued. Like I said, in 2002, went to a fully implementable program, acquired 34,451 acres under one settlement of litigation. We've acquired almost 32,000 acres under another program that we've been working on. And then most recently, we went in and there was a small district to the north of us called Broadview Water District. All the landowners within that district were in a position where they no longer wanted to farm. They had problems with their soil. Again, contract unreliability issues. They just said, well, we just need to give it up. And so we went in and bought that entire district, or bought the landowners out in that district. and then were able to bring that water into Westlands for use within Westlands.
What
So,
kind of prices?
Broadview, we purchased Broadview for about $2,500 an acre, and that represents, that'd be about $850 an acre foot for the actual allocation that goes to that property.
And so the districts bought the water, right? Not the land?
We went in and the landowners didn't want their land either, so we actually went in and bought the land. So the district, Westlands, owns the land, currently dryland farming it, and we got the water the water allocation associated with that property. And then what we're doing is we're now going through an assignment process where we're going to take that contract assignment from Broadview, transfer it to Westlands, and then that gets added to our contract amount. So when you put all this together and you look at what was cropped on that property and what the use was, essentially what we've taken about 230,000 acre feet that no longer needs to be brought into the district, or essentially we've taken our demand, which we looked at earlier was about 1.45 million acre feet. We lowered it by 230,000 acre feet. So we're trying to bring our supply here, our demand's up here. Now we go in and we buy this property, we bring our demand down. Again, another tool to help manage our supply and demand. And this, go ahead.
What are your plans for all this land that you're acquiring?
Well, that's a great question. I'll get to it in a few minutes, but currently what we're doing is we have a lot of the land leased out. And as I mentioned, one of the crops that we've seen increase in the last couple of years is wheat, and specifically winter wheat. And so we'll go out and we'll lease this property. They'll come in here, they'll put winter wheat. Fortunately, in the last couple of years, we've gotten some good winter rain on it, and they actually get a decent yield in the spring for harvest. And so we've had that. We have a lot of sheep operations. We just had one cattle operation come in. We've been working with the Bureau office, Bureau of Land Management, starting doing some habitat restoration for small game birds. We have a surface water storage project that we're looking at, and we also have 2 flood control projects for local communities. And so we've also looked at this land as, well, it's just not land you take out of production, but we're trying to use it as a resource as well and provide as many benefits as we can with it.
What about residential stuff?
At this point, there's not likely that any residential will be put in here. We also have an agreement with the Department of Health and Safety that we won't allow any more M&I connections into our system. And so if somebody was to come out here and build, they'd have to find groundwater to pump or another surface supply. So at this point, it's not likely development will come in.
What are your M&I connections? Are they cities in your area?
No, we have several. Well, we have a feedlot. We have some M&I processors. We probably have about, I think, 300 residences. And then the last big one is Lemoore Naval Air Station, has 2 connections to our system, and we service all of their water needs through our distribution system. And this is a picture of some of our land that the district owns. Here is a little bit of weed problem here, but here's some wheat in the background, so you can see that most of this land, once it gets maintained, it looks pretty good. One of the benefits of wheat is wheat will pull a lot more moisture out than the weeds will, and so you get a wheat crop on there, and it protects a lot of the invasive weeds from coming in. And then the last thing I want to talk about is just the small opportunities that do exist to enhance our supply. And the first thing is contract assignments, and that's what I mentioned about Broadview, that we went in and we essentially acquired the rights to the land or to the water from Broadview. We've done that with 4 other districts. Most of them are small, probably in the 1,000 acres. The contract supply of maybe 3,000 to 5,000 acre feet. We've brought that in, and so if you add all those up, we have about 46,000 acre feet of water supply that we've brought in from willing sellers. We continue to rely annually on water transfers. Historically, we required about 200 to 250,000 acre feet. Based on demand management of taking some of this land and idling it and not needing to supply for that, we've lowered this amount. But when we lower it, The other reason is we don't really have a choice because there continue to be new competitors coming into the market to buy water on an annual basis. We talked about potentially EWA will go out and purchase a state water supply that we may have went out and bought in the year or two before. So they're competing. We also have the federal wildlife areas within the south of Delta. So there's several refuges that exist that water. They're also buying water in the open market to bring into these refuges. And so they're also sometimes almost willing to pay more for water on a per acre foot basis than we can. We had a deal this last year where we went to another district and agreed to have the water delivered into our district at the cost of about probably $170 an acre foot. The refuge went up and bought the water for $180 an acre foot. And so we continue to see ourselves in a market to where we can't compete. And so based on that, we continue to see our annual amount that we can transfer on an annual basis reduced.
Question about that?
Yeah.
Is that primarily from south of Delta sources, or is that from north of Delta and across the Delta?
We do both. We've typically buy water south of the Delta. We do buy water north of the Delta as well. From a standpoint of ease of transfer and ease of moving water back and forth, south of Delta transfer is much more preferable. North of Delta, we started a process. Basically, to get a north of Delta transfer done, takes about 8 months. Cost is probably, just to process a transfer is maybe $100,000, and then, then you have to go. I can give you a long list of agencies you need to get approval for, but I mean, it's a very cumbersome process. And if the process were a little bit easier, I'm sure we'd be acquiring more north of Delta contract supplies than we do.
Can I also ask, what happened to your internal transfer program? I mean, or sales program?
Yeah,
thing you had a few years ago that Berkeley was involved with?
Yeah, we had a program, and it was running on a Macintosh. And so, no offense against Macintosh, but we got to the point where the program, as much as we marketed to our growers, just wasn't used. Some of the growers didn't have internet access, or they're driving around in a pickup. It's easier for them to pick up a phone number and call somebody and move water around than it did using that computer. The other thing is we had to mail out the program to them. They had to install it in their computer, et cetera. So it worked well, but I think it was cumbersome a little bit. So what we've done is kind of replace that with a process where, as I mentioned, where our grower can look at that satellite imagery on his property. He can also get into essentially a poster board that we set up, post that they have water for sale or they want to buy water, and be able to do it that way. They can click on it, get some piece of paper. They essentially electronically sign it, get sent into our office, and then the process is done. Yeah, over here.
How many acre feet annually is internally transferred?
I would say probably, let's say, transferred from a piece of property that's idled to property that's in production, maybe 30,000 acre feet. Water that's shuffled because I need water tomorrow. You give it to me tomorrow and I'll pay you $20 and give you some next month. It's probably 100,000 acre feet, I bet. So, I mean, that's how much, probably more of the market within the district is not wet water. It's more of I need to irrigate, X crop. I need it now. So that's what happens. Over here.
What percentage of these transfers are long-term transfers versus short-term transfers?
The assignments that I've mentioned are all long-term transfers, and they've gone through an extensive environmental process in terms of either state or federal NEPA or CEQA process to get the environmental documentation done. The transfers that are done annually, those are more done on a lower level environmental review process, and they're all 1 year. This is the last thing I'll focus on, and then we'll spend some time on questions, is the surface water storage project, which is a little bit exciting for us. And that kind of goes back to what are we doing on some of the property that we own. We've gone out and constructed a 80-acre pilot project site. And this is not a reservoir to do recharge or percolation of the groundwater. This is actual physical above ground storage. And what we're looking at doing is every year, especially this time of year, south of Delta is storage short. We get the San Luis Reservoir full. There's still water available to be pumped out of the Delta, but you can't pump anywhere because there's no facilities to put it in. And so what we've looked at is essentially constructing a storage water project, store water maybe about 2 to 3 months, and then release that water for use later. And we're looking at a project of about 25 to 75,000 acre feet, which for us represents about 5 to 15% of our total contract needs. So for us, it's a project right now that has a lot of merit. It's proven out to be looks pretty good in terms of environmentally. It looks good from an engineering standpoint. We've also, one of the other things that we're trying to do is work with the local refuge with Fish and Game to be able to construct the project in such a way that provides bird habitat. And so that project looks good and we're going to continue to move forward. So,
so would this be winter water and would this be less expensive or would it be part of your contract supply?
This would be water that I would say, well, it would be water that would be stored and then released at a time when we can use it. So what would typically happen is we wouldn't have that water available, say, to water user A to buy X amount of price. This would be brought into the district, incorporated as a district supply, and then probably allocated out as if it was contract supply to our water users. So kind of getting back to the chart of, how do all these things fit in? Again, our goal is to get back to this point where we're trying to stabilize water supply in the district. We're trying to stabilize demand in the district. And so we've talked about several different programs how we get there. We're using CalFed, the political environment, to manage our contract supply. We're using water transfers and groundwater to make up that difference to bring us up to this about 1.15 million acre feet. So even though that's our contract amount, because we know we're always going to be short of our contract, we need to find other methods to bring that supply up to that line. Continue to focus on keeping land idle in the district. I don't think there's any way around that. So as long as we stay on this path, what we're doing is more or less protecting the long-term resource, protecting farming within our district. And then to end up, just to kind of throw a quote up there, but this is a quote from Mark Reisner. This is after he wrote Cadillac Desert, but he talked about how ag land protection is probably one of the most significant issues that was left out of CVPIA, which I mentioned earlier, because he talks about it's very happy because there's a lot of similarities between farmland protection and the salmon conservation that we're currently seeing. So with that, take questions for a while.
So 2 questions. One is, can you answer that question that was asked earlier about what you're looking at, whatever slide, what kind of agricultural production do you do when you have less water? How do you do on that?
Well, the priority that we have, obviously, in the district is the permanent crops, the almonds, the nuts, the vegetables. Those are the money makers. And so the decisions our growers are going to do is the crops that make money are the crops that are going to get the water. And so when we do have dry years, chances are, lower value crops, the cotton or tomatoes or the grains, et cetera, that require irrigation are not going to be irrigated, and that water would be used and put up on more valuable crops. Most of our growers in our district are very diversified. So they have a mix of permanent crops, row crops, grain crops, et cetera. And so they're going to manage more or less their on-farm ability to make sure that the crops that make the most money are the ones that get the water. Yeah.
How much do you pay the Bureau of Reclamation per acre foot for your 1.15 million?
This year, our average cost per acre foot is about $70 per acre foot. And then we're out buying water on the market right now for about $165 an acre foot.
So with the Bush administration is going to renew these contracts for 25 years, is that $70 going to go up?
The $70 will go up, yes.
Your rate
We, well, the property tax, well, the county still collects property tax. We charge a we call it a land-based charge. It's probably be similar as a property tax, but we refer to it as land-based charge. It's about, I'd say on average about $15 per acre. And part of that charge includes the cost to repay. When I mentioned we went about these 100,000 acres, the district has gone out and taken out loans of about $160 million. And so those dollars that we collect as land-based charge are used to repay that $160 million. And so, again, when I talk about what's the district doing? No, because that revenue, it goes straight towards the debt. So that's more or less fixed. There's nothing we can do about that. So, I mean, the revenue, it's true we're collecting a revenue, but it's going against a debt that we need to pay.
Yeah. You had a slide that mentioned significant pumping changes between 2003 and 2005. What's been the change in price over the range? Because you mentioned $70.
Oh, in terms of water? I could get to, I wouldn't even try and take a venture. If you want to send me an email or something, I'd get that for you.
But was it significantly lower?
Yeah, I mean, there's some areas that probably paid on average maybe $15 an acre foot delivered, 20. Yeah.
Do you have a policy if an individual farmer wants to sell water outside the district?
Yeah, no. No, the district, I mean, right now, I mean, as you can see, we're water short. So right now the board is, opposed to selling water out of the district. We do participate in exchanges where we'll send water out and we'll get water back, and that's always at a 1-to-1 or greater percent. So
is that necessarily, isn't there a first refusal or something like that someone, if they wanted to, within Westlands could offer to buy the same price or something like that? I mean, even if they didn't have a policy in place, it would still maybe get rejected.
No, there was a provision in CVPIA that allowed for that, but that provision sunsetted, so that no longer applies. So there is now under I mean, the idea with CVPIA was, well, you're going to give up something, we're going to give you something back. One of them is you can transfer your water if you want. And, while it all sounded good, it hasn't worked out like that. But generally, I mean, right now the board policy is that the water stays in the district, is used in the district. We also have the counties that have passed groundwater ordinances that more or less prohibit permanent water transfers, especially if you're going to replace that with groundwater pumping. Yep.
In terms of the CVPIA, I saw some initial estimates from the Congressional Budget Office about the economic impacts on sort of California agriculture.
Yeah.
For your district, Westlands, do you have can you venture a guess at what it did actually, how much crop production money?
Well, I'll tell you. I mean, if you look at what they said, what they said in the PEIS, which is the Programmatic Environmental Impact Statement for CalFed, or for CVPIA, I'm sorry, was that we're going to take this water away, and they also had an idea of how the water, specifically 800,000 acre feet, was going to be taken from the CVPIA, or from the CVP, I'm sorry. And I think when Congress initially looked at it, they said, well, that represents maybe less than 10% of the total CVP water used. And so if you spread the pain of, hey, everybody can get by with, 8-10% less. But how they've implemented it, and not to, I don't want to make this sound political, but it is that when the Clinton administration came along, it was all imposed on us South of Delta contractors. And so we've borne the full brunt of that. And so, so you haven't seen everybody give up 8 or 10%. We're giving up 30%, 40%. And so I think, so because of that, all the numbers in the PIS obviously don't mean a thing. And I think the other thing is that they said, well, just go out and buy transfer water. You'll get water, it's just going to cost you more. Well, you can't just go out and get water. I mean, unfortunately, the regulatory environment doesn't provide it. I mean, we're talking about having to bring in, a couple 100,000 acre feet of water, and right now the only place that has is north of the Delta. And I mean, there's just no way you can move that much water across the Delta. I mean, there's just no way.
So you'd say that, the proportional impacts on Westlands would maybe be a little more than...
Well, all south of Delta contractors, yeah, definitely. I mean, we're not the only contractor. I mean, we represent about 60% of the service area South Delta, so there's other contractors that have been injured as well.
And would you say currently, even in 2006, you're still feeling, how are you still feeling?
Well, I mean, that's a tough question because, like this last year, last year and this year, we're going to get 85% of our allocation. So realistically, it's probably 100% a year, but we're not going to get there. But I mean, the problem isn't that you don't quite get up to 100%. The problem is you got the fluctuations, like I mentioned earlier. When you go from, 85%, we go to 20% next year, let's say. How do you, if you're a farmer, a grower, a landowner, how do you match that up? You know what I mean? You can't go in there every year and think you're going to get 80% of your contract supply. And so the problem is that the decisions that growers make are made so early that, if somebody came in and said, your allocation is 20%, you're going to plant for, maybe you plant that you can get 30% because you think it'll go up another 10. Well, if it goes up to 70%, you don't have all that land in production. It hasn't been planted, it hasn't been anything, so you're going to get, a bunch more water, but you can't put on any crops because you don't have any. And so I think that the hard part is that because things happen real time, I don't think you can go in there and really take, a snapshot model or the modeling that was done specifically in the PEIS and try and figure out, how much value it has or whether it projected things right because, a lot of these are human decisions and that's not included in the document.
Have you guys done any studies since then? Or?
Well, we looked at, when we looked at taking this land out of production, we also looked at taking 200,000 acres out of production, so a third of the district. And we went in and did a full-blown economic study on that. And that's on our website if you want to pull it off there. It was done in, I think, 2002. But yeah, I mean, it looks at, significant effects on, right now I think we're looking at, on average, maybe we'd provide about $1 billion of economy. You take 200,000 acres out, I think it dropped down to $750 million. So you got $250 million in, cash that comes right out of the local economy. I think, if I remember right, there was like a 17% reduction in employment. So, I mean, there's some hard numbers by taking that much out of production.
You talk about this local economy.
Yeah.
How much of that money gets spent within the district and how much of it is spent outside the district?
Internally, landowners have fixed costs that they got to pay for, equipment, taxes, employees, et cetera. I mean, all those costs are there no matter what. I don't know.
Okay, so fixed costs, how much is that in the district?
I don't even know, and I don't know if that was in our report either, but
It's not, because almost all of that money is taken out by absentee owners.
Well, if you want numbers on absentee landowners, we have very few absentee landowners. If you're talking about, somebody who lives up here in the Bay Area or Colorado, there's very few within the district any longer. We have a lot of, family farmers that continue to exist within the district, and so they continue to spend their money locally. So I guess,
You said that district. Family farmers in Westlands spending locally.
Well, quantify it. What's locally? I don't know what. I don't know what.
The basic thing is it's an issue of equity, which is, sort of coming up in the California economy. And when, a few people, for example, like the Peck plaintiffs in that settlement, you had 4 families getting something like $80 million, and then you you look at these just absurdly inequitable results socially, and you have very, very socially connected people like it was Tom Jones, for example, Swan, who you know, who profits phenomenally, you know, off the public trough, and then uses a rhetoric of you know, farmers. The California public is finding it less and less credible, the rhetoric of family farmers spending locally in the Westlands District. And that was a question as to why should the California public trust Westlands Water District to make responsible decisions for the future?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure Tom Jones. I'm not sure who you're referring to about. I don't know of a Tom Jones in our district, but on the Peck settlement, as an engineer, I mean, I would assume that we go to court over that deal, but it got settled. The United States decided to settle it. That's their issue, not ours. And so, you know, if you have a beef, that's with, you know, you need to go somewhere else besides Westlands, because I mean, we were sued as well in the Peck litigation. I mean, we were sued because the Peck said that we were supposed to provide drainage. And so we were in that lawsuit as well, not with the Peck's United States, but as defendants with the United States. And so
who kept the water?
The district bought the property and got the water, and it stays in the district. And that was part of the settlement, and we paid for it. But, I mean, I guess the issue is that, you know, are we making the best use of the resource? And I guess, you know, I would say that in the last 4 years, I know of probably 20 different farming operations that went bankrupt because as a result of just, they weren't wasting money or spending money. They just were trying to make a go of it, and farming is difficult. And so, and when you look at, you know, our growers, I would say that you look at the crops that they're planting, how they're using the water. You know, I don't think you can argue that they're not being the best stewards or one of the best stewards in the state. I mean, if you know, people come in and say, who's using the water the best in the state? Who's got the highest efficiency? Who's growing the most yields with the least amount of water? People come to Westlands. And so to say that for some reason that you can't trust, people can't trust Westlands or how they're using water, I guess I disagree with that. And the other thing is, if like I said, we went out there, our growers, our board decided to go out and borrow $160 million to idle land to deal with issues internal to the district in terms of balancing supply and demand. And you know, we're not out there trying to get federal money for that, not state money. We did it because it was the best thing to do to manage our resource. And so I guess I would just, you know, say that people can say that, but you know, come to the district, come and look around, and then try and make that claim again. Yes?
I just want to ask a question about drainage, and that I know it's not just a Westlands issue, but could you just say a few words about what is planned? I think it's has a plan for drainage in the future.
Yeah, sure. Part of the area that we talked about where we bought land and have fallowed it or idled it is an area that's drainage impacted. And when the project was originally designed and constructed in the early 1960s, as a matter of fact, when the state water plan was put together in the 1930s, it was identified that this area, that areas within Bakersfield, that areas north of us would require a drain. And that was a master drain for the valley that would drain essentially the trough of the valley from south end of the San Joaquin Valley up back into the delta. And so obviously in the early 80s, that drain was constructed. There was about 5,000 acres within Westlands that was hooked up to that drain. It discharged for a period of 3 years, and it was shut off. And, pardon?
For good reason.
Yes. And so So now so essentially we've been doing battle with reclamation. We've been trying to get drainage put back in. We've sued the United States for drainage. We've been sued by others for drainage, but that the United States was supposed to provide. And so now we're at a point where the Bureau came back. They've put together a NEPA document, environmental impact statement, to provide drainage to Westlands and other contractors, other San Luis unit contractors, as well as some neighboring districts. And they're looking at having a final record decision probably in July of this year. And
is there going to be a drain?
This point, reclamation has not told us what they've identified 4 alternatives in there, and they have not told us which one that they are leaning towards. So cannot tell you. Don't know. Yes.
Are there either incentives that you think should be developed to promote more efficient water use in agriculture? For example, in urban water use, there's now tiered pricing to really actively promote conservation.
Right.
I mean, does that exist?
Well, I mean, we're all required either, we as all just do CVP contractors. Central Valley project contractors, in order for us to maintain contract deliveries, we have to prepare annually a water conservation plan. And within it, it has some of those features you've talked about. It talks about best use of water, water efficiency programs, improvements, tiered pricing, et cetera. And so we've identified what tools we're using to improve water conservation within our district. I think the state has the same thing, and so I think those incentives are out there. I know there's grant funding to get those programs as well, but I mean we support those.
But are those incentives distorted by subsidies?
I guess, what do you mean? What programs?
Cotton
Well, cotton, let's talk about cotton for just a second. We grow, right now, I think last year we had 130,000 acres of cotton within the district. Of that, I think 80,000 acres was Pima, which receives no subsidy. And the balance was Acala or upland, so it was about 50,000 acres, which does receive a subsidy, which has decreased on an average of probably 20,000 acres a year. So I would expect that within the next 3 to 5 years that we're not going to have any district or cotton in the district that is worth a subsidy because, one, they just can't make it even with a subsidy. Doesn't have any value. In terms of water conservation programs, no, I mean, why spend $800 and some an acre on a crop that probably is not going to exist in a couple of years? And secondly, you're better off spending that money on a higher and better use crop.
Okay, I think we're going to have to cut it off there, so please join me in thanking